Hi, my name is Rob Shirley. I'm a nutritionist with Adisseo USA. Today I'm going to talk about the effect of different selenium sources on egg production and selenium deposition in aged laying hens under heat stress. The breakout of this talk is extremely simple. We're going to talk about basics of selenium, what it is, why it's needed and used, i.e. the biological significance. We're going to take a look at some of the available sources in the marketplace. Then we're going to talk about the data that this presentation was built around. And of course, as always, the number one goal that I have is to create understanding and discussion along the way. So my email is in the first slide and the last slide of this presentation. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions or comments. So diving right in, selenium was discovered over 200 years ago. It is arguably one of the most important yet most forgotten and undervalued trace mineral in nutrition. In 1974, the FDA recognized that selenium deficiency occurs in livestock. Thus, it allowed limited dietary supply of selenium to be supplemented into a livestock feed, be it inorganic sodium selenite or sodium selenate. Today, the current supplemental dose rate is limited to 0.3 ppm within the feed. That's using inorganic or organic sources. This supplemental rate does not include selenium from raw ingredients such as corn, soy, meat and bone meal, distillers, so on. If we look at the sources out in the marketplace today, there are inorganic and organic selenium sources. Organic selenium sources are less toxic, have better bioavailability than inorganic sources. If we look to the left here, sodium selenite and sodium selenate are the byproducts of copper refining. Essentially, the anode slime that's left over is further refined into these two products, which are very good, but they have their issues when they're fed at high levels. If we look at the right side of the graph, we have selenomethionine and hydroxyselenomethionine. These two selenium sources are very similar but very distinct from each other in that the selenomethionine has a nitro group and the hydroxyselenomethionine has a hydroxyl group. Upon absorption, this hydroxyl group is replaced with a nitro group, so it becomes L-selenomethionine. L-selenomethionine is found as a pure form and is also found in seleno yeast. Seleno yeast manufactures L-selenomethionine in a fermentation vat where various conditions are managed. Essentially, during the fermentation process, sodium selenite is added to the fermentation, and because the yeast do not have a selenium requirement per se, this is what they make or to detoxify the selenium. There are only 4 suppliers within the world, and if you look at the concentration of selenomethionine within the seleno yeast products, it's quite variable between suppliers and also within a supplier. I've seen values that have been as low as 22% and as high as 74%. On average, you're going to see about 60% of the selenium within seleno yeast as selenomethionine. To get around the variability or the inconsistency of seleno yeast on the selenomethionine side, Adisseo created something called hydroxyselenomethionine. We've branded this as Silicio. Basically, what we've done is we've taken the MHA molecule, split it in half, taken the sulfur out, removed it, and put selenium back in, and then put the molecule back together. Because this is a synthetic process, we have a very pure product that comes out the back end. So in every bag that you get, it's at least 99.5% pure. So you know what you're going to get every bag and every scoop that you add to your livestock feed. Making a comparison even more, or making another comparison, if we look at selenium deposition within, say, muscle protein, this is a pectoralis major from a broiler, and we look at the selenium deposition on the y-axis. If we compare the inorganics, the selenites, the glycinates, the proteinuria to that of a negative control where we're not supplementing selenium, there's very little selenium deposition within the muscle. However, if we look at the organic sources, whether it's Silicio, selenomethionine, a pure source, or seleno yeast that's good quality at 74% or poor quality at 33%, you're going to see a lot more selenium deposition within the meat of that animal. Now, keep in mind, because we have lower levels of selenomethionine in these two yeast products, this is why you're going to see a lot less selenomethionine within that tissue. Taking this a step further and looking at data from 2009 to 2016 and in a meta-analysis, again looking at pectoralis major from the broiler, we're going to look at the total selenium within that muscle using either sodium selenate, glycinate, seleno yeast, selenomethionine, or Silicio. As we look at the deposition, or rather the supplementation rate from 0 to 1.3 ppm, we can see that the glycinate and the sodium selenate really don't deposit that selenium within the breast tissue. However, when we start to use that seleno yeast product, deposition goes up. And if you use the selenomethionine or the Silicio product, the deposition of selenium goes way up compared to these other products in the marketplace. So there is a reason for this. And that reason goes back to how the body handles these different selenium sources. If you look at the selenoglycinates, selenocysteines, selenates, the selenites, all these are absorbed very well, but they all have to be broken down into selenide. At this point, this pink dot here, this region, is kind of like the hub on a bike. where there's a decision that the body makes either to methylate and excrete this selenium into the environment, or it is further converted into selenocysteine, where then it goes into selenoprotein synthesis. Now, when we look at organic selenium sources, we have selenomethionine and hydroxyselenomethionine. This hydroxyselenomethionine, once absorbed, will be converted into L-selenomethionine. And at that point, it's either stored in the general protein pool. We're talking about muscles, skin, whatever proteins made by the body. The body doesn't discriminate between selenomethionine and methionine. So this selenomethionine, even though it's very low in the diet compared to regular methionine, it will be incorporated into all different types of proteins. If it's not going to be stored, it will go through a transselenation process and various other reactions to get to the selenide point. Again, it's either methylated and excreted, or it's converted into selenocysteine and then put into selenoprotein synthesis. It's very important to note that selenium is only active in selenoproteins. This is the only place that selenium has its activity. It's not going to be active in its single form or in its raw form. And the other point that I want to make is, if you're looking or using inorganic sources, the body is only going to use as much as it needs, and it will excrete the rest. And so there's no appreciable absorption, or rather storage, of inorganic selenium because of this process. Now, I mentioned selenoproteins, and it's very important that I mention these because this, again, is where selenium has its activity. There's 25 selenoproteins in mammals, 26 in avian species, and there's a lot of different things, different metabolic reactions that these selenoproteins participate in. So, for example, we have thyroid hormone activation, peroxide detoxification, thioreduction regeneration, methionine reduction. All these are very important when you see, or when the animal experiences, oxidative stress. If the animal sees a lot of oxidative stress and it doesn't have these selenoproteins, that oxidative stress overwhelms the body's systems, starts to interfere with normal metabolism, and that's where you start to see a lot of performance drag. So again, these selenoproteins are extremely important because they play a lot of roles in redox regulation. And so whether you're a chicken, a turkey, a pig, an old man, or a young baby, there are a lot of challenging conditions. So that could be metabolism, environmental stress, dietary stress, immune stress. Any one of these or all of these together can cause recurring issues, that being performance drag, such as growth and egg production, lower fertility, conception, hatchability, and birth rate, poor immunity, immune response, increased morbidity and mortality. The list can go on. The goal of selenium nutrition, when you're talking about organic selenium, is to build up selenium reserves within the body in a non-toxic form. So when we do that, we're able to better protect the cell, the host, from a variety of excessive oxidative reactions and allow normal metabolism to occur. I liken it to this. If you have a selenium reserve and your animal gets sick, just like you, if you get sick, you're going to stop eating. You're going to start to metabolize or catabolize your proteins. And at that point, selenium or selenomethionine is released, and then it can go into the synthesis of selenoproteins so that those selenoproteins can deal with the oxidative stress within the body and get that animal back to normal in sense of normal metabolism, growth, and production. So deposition is good, but what's the effect of selenium sources in heat stress laying hens? And this is where we're going to get into the laying hen talk. We know that selenium is very important, and there are a lot of different ways to look at selenium and how it affects the animal. Well, we took a step back and we said, well, what happens when we have a heat stress layer and we feed selenium, organic, inorganic? The objective of the study was to determine the efficacy of silicio compared to a seleno yeast and a sodium selenite when fed to Highline W36 laying hens over a 31-week period. These hens started off at 40 weeks of age and ended the study at 71 weeks of age under heat stress. Our hypothesis was that silicio has no effect upon laying hen performance when supplemented under heat stress conditions when compared to other organic and inorganic forms of selenium. We had 3 treatments. We had 12 replicates per lot, 10 cages per replicate lot, 2 hens per cage, 20 hens per replicate lot. Per treatment, we had 240 birds. Across the 3 treatments, we had 720 birds that we worked with. The laying hens were raised under a minimum of 85 degrees Fahrenheit in an enclosed building with natural ventilation at the University of Georgia. The selenium doses were maintained at 0.3 ppm, where we gave either sodium selenite in treatment 1, Salmonella yeast in treatment 2, or Silicio in treatment 3. Looking to the graph in the lower right-hand corner, the average house temperature was maintained above 85 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the trial. The average house relative humidity in this peach color, did vary from the beginning to the end of the trial. Keep in mind that the heat index is going to be a lot higher when the humidity is higher. So these birds were truly under stress and probably feeling a lot more than 85 degrees Fahrenheit at the beginning of the trial. We started the laying hens off on a pre-experimental diet in this first column here, just to make sure that everybody was put onto the same dietary regime, and there was very little to no difference in how the birds responded to the diets once given. We used this pre-experimental diet to set up our sodium selenite, Salmonella yeast, and Silicio feeds. Basically, we switched from the typical UGA mineral mix to a selenium-free mineral mix. We added sodium selenite at 600 ppm, we added sodium selenite, which was a 600 ppm premix, Salmonella yeast, which was a 600 ppm premix, or Silicio, which was a 600 ppm premix, at a pound per ton to the feed. At about 63 weeks of age, we noticed that the birds were getting overconditioned, so we lowered the amino acid density and also the energy density of these feeds, but we maintained the selenium treatments and addition rates. Looking at the materials and methods and the results, we did measure body weight, feed intake, egg weight, egg component weights, specific gravity, Hall units, yolk color, but these were not significant. We did measure some things that were significant. That was selenium content of eggs and liver, total eggs produced per hen, total marketable eggs produced per hen, total cracked eggs produced per hen, and feed conversion, both on a period and a cumulative basis. Now, I know that I said that body weight and feed intake were not significant. You typically don't show those data, but I just want to reemphasize the point here that there is absolutely no difference between the body weights of these hens or the feed intake of these hens throughout the trial. You could argue that there was a numerical increase for the sodium selenite group, but again, statistics is telling us that there's no difference there. When we look at the hepatic selenium deposition, though, there was no difference between sodium selenite and Salmonella yeast in terms of how much selenium was in the liver, but when we fed Silicio, we had a 23.7% increase in selenium within the liver. So this is very important because the liver is a main organ, or one of the main organs, which manages de novo synthesis of fat and other metabolic reactions that support egg synthesis or egg development. If we look at the whole egg, these data pattern that or mirror that of the liver data, where we saw no difference between the sodium selenite in yellow and the Salmonella yeast in blue. However, when we fed Silicio, we saw a dramatic and significant increase in the amount of selenium within the egg. Turning to egg production and quality, in the 31-week period, Silicio-fed hens produced 4.31 more eggs than sodium selenite-fed hens, and the Silicio-fed hens produced 2.03 more eggs than the Salmonella yeast hens. On a million head complex, that's a respective 4.31 million extra eggs, or 11,972 more cases of eggs. Or if we compare the Silicio versus Salmonella yeast, that's 2.03 million more eggs, or 5,639 more cases of eggs. If we look at the feed conversion from these hens, it's very important to remember that there was no difference in feed intake. However, egg production was better for the Silicio-fed hens. And looking at the data, we didn't see any differences, significant differences, from 42 up to 57 weeks of age. At this point, we started to see separation within the treatment. So if we look to the green bar, that's Silicio, the blue bar is Salmonella yeast, and the sodium selenite is the yellow bar. And these colors will be the same for the next two, or actually three graphs. What I want to point out here is that looking at the feed per egg, kilo per kilo, the sodium selenite treatment had the highest feed conversion, the Salmonella yeast had the intermediate feed conversion, and the Silicio-fed birds had the lowest feed conversion. When you look at this on a feed per dozen of eggs, again, nothing was statistically different up until week 57. At that point, again, the selenite-fed birds had the highest feed conversion. The selenium yeast-fed birds had the intermediate feed conversion, and the silicio-fed birds had the lowest feed conversion. And if we look at this on a total feed divided by total eggs produced, that's a feed per egg basis. Again, the same story holds true. The sodium selenite-fed birds had the highest feed conversion, selenium yeast-fed birds had the intermediate conversion, and the silicio-fed birds had the lowest feed conversion. This is a little bit more of a complex graph, but if we look at the bars here, we have our blue, we have our green, we have our orange bars, and on the axes we have the scales. So the feed per egg and the feed per dozen of eggs is on the left axis here, and on the right axis we're looking at feed per egg. I have some conclusions here, or some observations that were made, so we'll just follow these and you can look at the bar graph to the left. First, looking at the feed per egg, compared to sodium selenite, selenium yeast and silicio reduced feed conversion by 3.1 and 6.5 points respectively. Looking at the feed per dozen, compared again to sodium selenite, selenium yeast and silicio reduced feed conversion by 1.5 and 5.3 points respectively, which is huge. And if we look at the feed per egg compared to sodium selenite, silicio reduced feed conversion by 4 grams of feed per egg. Now, if we take the math and we run it over the 31-week period, if you're feeding silicio under heat stress conditions, your hens are going to eat 956 short tons less feed. So if you know how much your feed costs per ton, you just multiply that by this number of short tons, and that's how much money you'll save. In summary, silicio or selenium from silicio readily transferred into the body's general protein pool as selenomethionine, i.e. as a storage form. This means that higher selenium in the egg is possible. And if you're a consumer eating this, there is some extra nutritional benefit there. So some people may want to market that as a benefit within the eggs that they're producing. From a metabolic standpoint, the liver contained a lot more selenium, which means that there are a lot more selenoproteins there to help with managing the oxidative stress. The higher selenium deposition via silicio resulted in the hen being able to overcome the oxidative stress and production drag that coincided with heat stress, again, via selenoproteins. This meant more eggs or more saleable eggs, better feed conversion. And when you link these two together, there's substantial economic returns possible when laying hens are fed silicio under heat stress. With that, I want to thank you for your attention. And again, if you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to your Adisseo sales rep, or you can email me at rob.shirley@adisseo.com. Take care.